blind, skinny, tied to a tree. A cowboy rescued him and got a reward he never expected. The sun had been burning over the Texas panhandle for 6 straight days without mercy. It came down like something personal, like the sky itself had a grudge against the earth below. The red dirt cracked in long, jagged lines, and the dry grass bent so low it nearly touched the ground, as if bowing to something that didn't deserve reverence. Dust devils spun lazily in the distance, going nowhere in particular, just restless and lost, much like the man riding slowly through all of it. His name was Cal Donovan. He was 34 years old, though most people who met him guessed older. Not because he was worn down or broken, quite the opposite. Cal had the kind of face that had seen a great deal and decided not to be bothered by most of it. Deep-set green eyes the color of river water in shade. A jaw that hadn't known a razor in 2 weeks. Broad shoulders under a faded brown duster that had once been a fine coat, back when he'd cared about such things. He rode a pale gray mare named Fable, a horse of uncommon intelligence and stubbornness, and the two of them had an understanding that didn't require much conversation. Cal was not a wanted man. That was worth saying because in that part of Texas in the year 1878, many men on horseback were. He had no bounty on his head, no blood debts that hadn't been settled, no lawmen in any county looking for him with purpose. He was simply a man moving from one place to another, carrying a bedroll, a rifle, a pistol, some dried beef, a canteen of water that was getting low, and very little else. He'd come from Abilene and was heading toward a small town called Redgate, where a man named Hobbs owed him $40 for fence work he'd done the previous spring. $40 wasn't much. But it was his, and Cal Donovan believed in collecting what was his. He wasn't in any hurry. He never was. He'd been riding for about 4 hours that morning when Fable slowed without being asked. The mare did that sometimes, stopped or changed pace when something caught her attention that Cal hadn't noticed yet. He'd learned long ago to trust that instinct. He eased back on the reins and let the horse lead him, watching her ears swivel forward toward a cluster of cottonwood trees maybe 200 yards off the main trail. Cal squinted. The trees were the only real shade for miles, hunched around a dry creek bed like old men around a fire. And there was something there. He couldn't make out what exactly, just a shape that didn't fit the landscape. He guided Fable off the trail and rode toward it slowly, his right hand dropping to his side out of habit, not quite touching the pistol on his hip, but not far from it either. As he got closer, the shape resolved itself into something that made him pull up short. There was a dog tied to one of the cottonwood trees. Not just tied, bound tight with a length of rough rope that looped twice around the trunk and knotted around the animal's neck in a way that looked deliberate and cruel. The dog was lying on its side in the dirt, ribs heaving with each breath, legs moving weakly but going nowhere. It was a border collie, or had been once, mostly black with white patches on its chest and muzzle. But the white had gone gray with dust and filth, and the animal's frame was so thin that every rib showed clearly, each one a ridge under dull, matted fur. Cal dismounted without thinking about it. He wrapped Fable's reins around a low branch and walked toward the dog, crouching as he got close, keeping his movements slow and his voice low. "Easy now," he said. "Easy." The dog's head lifted at the sound, and that was when Cal saw the eyes. They were clouded over entirely, both of them, the pale bluish white of skimmed milk, blind. The dog was blind. It had been tied to a tree in the middle of the Texas wilderness, blind, with no water, no shade worth mentioning, and no way to free itself. Someone had done this on purpose. Someone had taken a blind, helpless animal and left it here to die slowly under the sun. Cal felt something move through him that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite sadness. It was something older and quieter than either of those things. It was the feeling a man gets when he encounters cruelty done not in a moment of passion, but with planning, with intent. Someone had brought the rope. Someone had tied the knots. Someone had ridden away knowing exactly what they were leaving behind. He drew his knife and cut the rope. The dog flinched at the sound of the blade but didn't struggle. It lay there trembling, sides heaving, and Cal could see now how bad it was. The rope had worn a raw patch around the animal's neck. Its tongue was swollen and pale from dehydration. When Cal ran his hand gently along its side, he could count the ribs easily, one by one, like the keys of some instrument no one had played in a long time. He went back to Fable and got his canteen. He poured water slowly into his hat, a wide-brimmed felt hat he'd had for years and had no particular affection for, and brought it to the dog. The animal smelled the water before it got there, and its nose began to work. And then it raised itself weakly on trembling legs and drank, slowly at first, then faster. Cal let it drink most of what was in the canteen. He kept just enough for himself to get to the next creek, if there was one where he remembered one being. Then he sat back on his heels in the dirt and looked at the dog for a long moment. "Where'd you come from?" he said. The dog, having drunk, sat back down in the dirt and turned its clouded eyes toward his voice. Its ears, large and expressive, angled forward. Its tail, just a short stub, possibly docked at birth, made a small, uncertain movement. Not quite a wag, more like a question. Cal looked around. There was no sign of a camp nearby. No fire ring, no tracks he could read easily, no indication of where the animal had come from or who had brought it here. The rope was cheap and common, the kind sold in any hardware store in any town in Texas. Whoever had done this had left no calling card. He looked back at the dog. "I can't leave you here," he said. It wasn't really a decision he made so much as a fact he acknowledged. He'd known it the moment Fable had brought him off the trail. He fashioned a sling of sorts out of his bedroll and managed to get the dog up across Fable's back ahead of the saddle, draped across the horse's neck with Cal's hand holding it steady. Fable accepted this with only a brief moment of skepticism, then settled into her walk without complaint. Cal rode slowly, keeping his hand on the dog, feeling the animal's breathing gradually even out as the miles passed. He found a creek an hour later, narrow and sluggish, but real water, and stopped to let both the horse and dog drink properly. He refilled his canteen and ate some dried beef in the shade of a willow, tearing off small pieces and offering them to the dog, who took them delicately from his fingers as if trying to be polite. "You've got manners," Cal said. "Someone taught you that." The dog's ears moved at his voice. "Someone who wasn't the same person who tied you to that tree," he added. He rode into Redgate just before sundown. It was a town of maybe 300 souls, with a main street that was more mud than road after the last rain, a saloon, a feed store, a small church at the far end of the street, and a sheriff's office that looked like it had been built in a hurry and never quite finished. There was a doctor's office, too, above the barber shop, a hand-painted sign in the window that read, "Dr. Elias Pruitt, Medicine and Surgery." Cal took the dog there first, before he even stabled Fable. He went up the outside stairs with the dog in his arms, lighter than it should have been, lighter than a dog that size had any right to be, and knocked on the door. The man who answered was in his 50s, small and neat, with wire-rimmed glasses and the precise, economical movements of someone who had trained himself to be careful with everything he touched. He looked at Cal. He looked at the dog. He stepped back and opened the door wider. "Bring it in," he said. Dr. Pruitt examined the dog with the same thoroughness he'd have given a human patient, and Cal respected that. He checked the raw patch on the neck, the eyes, the ribs, the gums, the paws, which were torn, Cal noticed for the first time, as if the animal had been walking on rough ground for a long time before being tied. "Severe dehydration," the doctor said. "Malnutrition. These eyes, this isn't recent. He was born this way, or close to it. Congenital blindness." He paused. "He's also been well trained at some point. Look how calm he is. This isn't a wild animal. Someone spent considerable time with this dog. And then someone else tied him to a tree," Cal said. The doctor looked up over his glasses. You found him like that? 2 hours east. Cottonwoods by a dry creek. The doctor was quiet for a moment. I'll keep him here tonight. He needs fluids and food and rest. If he's as strong as I think he might be under all this, he'll recover. What do I owe you? Nothing yet. Come back in the morning. Cal found Hobbs, collected his $40, which took some doing, because Hobbs had apparently convinced himself the debt had expired, and then ate a proper meal at the only restaurant in town, which was run out of a widow's kitchen, and charged 20 cents for beef stew and cornbread. He slept at the boarding house and was back at the doctor's office at 7 in the morning. The dog was sitting up. That was the first thing Cal saw when the doctor opened the door. The animal was sitting near the window, head lifted, those clouded eyes catching the morning light. It looked almost dignified, in the way that animals sometimes do when they've made a decision about something. Remarkable constitution, the doctor said. He ate last night and again this morning. The neck is healing. Another day or two and he'll be ready to travel. He looked at Cal carefully. Do you intend to keep him? Cal looked at the dog. I don't know, he said honestly. He needs someone, the doctor said. Dogs like this, trained, intelligent, bonded, they don't do well alone, and a blind dog on its own in this country. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Cal crouched down and held out his hand. The dog turned toward him immediately, not toward the sight of him, because the dog had no sight, but toward the sound of him, the smell of him, some quality in his presence that the animal recognized. It walked to him carefully, navigating the unfamiliar floor with deliberate steps, and put its head against Cal's knee. Cal was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. He named the dog Arrow, because despite being blind, the animal always moved in a straight line toward whatever it was heading for, direct and purposeful, as if it could see exactly where it was going even when it couldn't see anything at all. Cal stayed in Redgate for 3 more days to let Arrow recover fully. He spent the time doing what he often did in strange towns, fixing things that needed fixing, helping where help was wanted, keeping his ears open and his opinions mostly to himself. He repaired a broken wheel on the blacksmith's wagon. He helped stack lumber at the feed store. He listened to the people of Redgate talk about their town, their troubles, their weather, their neighbors. On the second day, he started hearing a name, Corvin Marsh. It came up in pieces and fragments, the way important things often did in small towns, where people talked around what they meant rather than at it. Corvin Marsh owned land to the east, a big spread, several thousand acres, more than any one man needed. He had men working for him whose reputations were not good. There had been disputes with small farmers along his borders, disputes that had a way of ending badly for the small farmers. A fence broken here, cattle driven off there, a barn that caught fire under suspicious circumstances. Nobody said Corvin Marsh was a bad man directly. They said other things. They said he was a man who got what he wanted. They said he had dealings with certain people in the county seat. They said the sheriff of Redgate had visited Marsh's ranch more than once and come back looking preoccupied and saying nothing much. On the third day, an old man named Delbert Cush came and sat next to Cal on the bench outside the boarding house. Delbert was 70 if he was a day, with hands like gnarled roots and eyes that had seen several lifetimes' worth of the world. He sat there for a while without saying anything, watching Arrow, who was lying at Cal's feet, following the sounds of the street with those sightless eyes. That's a fine dog, Delbert said finally. He's doing better, Cal agreed. Another silence. Found him tied to a cottonwood east of here, you said, Delbert said, by the dry fork of Cutter Creek. Cal looked at him. Word gets around. In a town this size, everything gets around. Delbert was quiet again. That land by Cutter Creek belongs to Corvin Marsh. Cal said nothing, but he was listening. There was a family out that way, Delbert continued. The Calloway family. Anders Calloway, his wife Mary, their boy Thomas, 17 years old. They had a small place, Maybe 160 acres, good water access, been there 8 years, good people. He paused. The dog was Thomas's. Boy raised that dog from a pup, named him Ghost on account of the eyes. Cal looked down at Arrow, Ghost, lying at his feet. "What happened to the Callaways?" he asked. Delbert looked at his hands for a moment. Marsh wanted their land. It sits between 2 pieces of his property, you see. He made offers. Anders refused. Then there was trouble with their cattle. Then their well got fouled somehow. Couldn't prove anything. Then one night 3 months ago, Anders Calloway turned up dead in the road between his place and town. Horse threw him, they said. Except Anders Calloway had been riding horses his whole life, and that horse of his was as gentle as a Sunday sermon. The bench boards creaked as Delbert shifted his weight. Mary took the boy and left. Went east to her sister's place in Fort Worth. Couldn't stay, couldn't fight it, didn't have the money to try. Marsh got the land. He paused. The dog. Thomas would have taken him, I expect. But I heard one of Marsh's men took the dog before they could leave. Said the boy owed Marsh for the cattle trouble, and the dog was payment. That was 3 months ago. Cal was very still. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. Delbert looked at him directly for the first time. "Because you found the dog, and you've got the look of a man who wants to know the whole truth about a thing. And because I'm too old to do anything about any of it myself, and it needs doing, and someone needs to know." He stood up slowly, his joints making their complaints. "That's all." He walked away down the street without looking back. Cal sat there for a long time after that. Arrow raised his head and found Cal's hand with his nose and pressed against it gently. Cal scratched behind the dog's ear and thought about Anders Calloway dying in a road and a boy having to leave his dog behind and a man named Corvin Marsh who had gotten everything he wanted. He thought about a 17-year-old kid somewhere in Fort Worth who didn't know that his dog was alive. That night, Cal went to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Wade Tillis was a man of about 45, heavy-set, with the look of someone who had once been something more than he currently was, and had made his peace with the distance between those 2 versions of himself. He listened to Cal's account of finding the dog with an expression of careful neutrality. "I know about the Calloway situation," Tillis said. "The death was ruled accidental." "You believe that?" Tillis was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Donovan, I've got a town of 300 people to look after. I've got a county commissioner who thinks highly of Corvin Marsh. I've got a deputy who's barely old enough to shave. What I believe and what I can prove and what I can act on are 3 very different territories." "The dog," Cal said. "The dog is a stolen animal. That's something you can act on." Tillis looked at him. "Marsh would say the dog was taken as payment for a debt. From a family that was run off their land by the man claiming the debt, and then the dog was tied to a tree and left to die." Cal kept his voice even. "I'm not asking you to go after Marsh for what happened to Anders Calloway. I understand why you can't. I'm asking you if there's any law in this county against what was done to that animal." Tillis was quiet for a long moment. "There's something," he said slowly. "It's not much, but there's something." What Tillis had was a letter. It had come to his office 2 weeks earlier from a lawyer in Fort Worth acting on behalf of Mary Calloway. The letter was a formal claim to certain personal property, including a dog, described as a male border collie with congenital blindness, that had been taken without lawful cause from the Calloway household. The lawyer had sent it to Redgate because that was the last known address of the dog's whereabouts. Tillis had set it aside because he hadn't known what to do with it. "If the dog is recovered," Tillis said, "and returned to the Calloways through legal means, that's a lawful action I can support. And if Marsh objects, then he can take it up with the lawyer in Fort Worth." Tillis almost smiled. "And with whoever filed the criminal complaint I'd be submitting about the condition that animal was found in. Cruelty to animals. Abandonment with intent to cause death." He paused. "It won't bring down Marsh, but it'll cost him something. And it's something I can actually do." "That's enough," Cal said. It took 4 more days to arrange. Tillis sent a telegram to the lawyer in Fort Worth. The lawyer sent one back confirming that Mary Calloway and her son Thomas were prepared to receive the dog. Tillis prepared the documentation. Cal signed a statement about where and how he'd found the animal and in what condition. Marsh's name appeared in none of the official documents. The property had been in the care of unnamed individuals. The dog had been found abandoned. These were the legal facts, thin and incomplete, but real. On the morning of the 5th day, Cal saddled Fable and loaded his gear and picked up Arrow, Ghost, and settled the dog across his saddle for the long ride to Fort Worth. It was 4 days east, give or take, depending on the weather. The weather held. Cal arrived in Fort Worth on a Tuesday afternoon, in the kind of heat that made the whole city shimmer at the edges. It was a bigger place than Redgate, thousands of people, brick buildings going up on every corner, the smell of cattle and horses and wood smoke and something that might have been progress, though Cal had his reservations about progress. Mary Calloway and her son Thomas were staying with Mary's sister in a modest house on the eastern edge of town, away from the noise of the stockyards. The sister, a woman named Ruth, answered the door when Cal knocked. She looked at him. She looked at the dog in his arms. She put a hand over her mouth. "Thomas," she said, turning back into the house. "Thomas, come here." The boy came down the hallway at a walk that became a run before he got to the door, and when he saw the dog, when he saw Ghost, he made a sound that Cal would remember for a long time. Not words exactly, just the sound that comes out of a person when something they'd given up hoping for walks back into the world. The dog heard the boy's voice before the boy reached him, and the change in the animal was immediate and complete. Every line of Ghost's body shifted, ears forward, head up, tail going now in a real wag, his whole frame trembling with recognition. When Thomas put his hands on the dog, Ghost pressed his face into the boy's chest, and the boy wrapped both arms around the dog and held on. Cal stood on the porch and looked at his boots and gave them some time. Mary Calloway came to the door a few minutes later. She was a woman in her mid-30s, quiet-faced, with eyes that had been through something hard and had come out the other side still clear. She looked at Cal for a moment without speaking. "How did you find him?" she asked. He told her. All of it. The cottonwood trees, the dry creek, the rope, the condition of the animal, the doctor in Redgate, the days of recovery. He told her about Delbert Cush and what the old man had said. He told her about the sheriff and the letter and the documentation. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When he was done, she said, "Why did you do all this? You could have left him there." Cal thought about it. "I don't know exactly," he said. "I couldn't leave him there. And once I knew the whole story, I couldn't just stop in the middle of it." She nodded slowly, as if that made sense to her. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing," he said. "The dog's yours. He's back where he belongs." She shook her head. "That's not how I was raised. What did you spend?" He calculated the doctor's bill, which Pruitt had kept modest, the extra days in Redgate, the road food. He named a number and she named a larger one, and after a short and quietly stubborn exchange, they settled on something between the two. She went inside and came back with the money and held it out to him. He took it. It seemed important to her that he take it, and Cal had learned to read what was important to people. "There's something else," she said. "Something I should tell you, since you've been honest with me." She paused. "My husband, before everything happened, he kept documents, records of the things Marsh did, witnesses he talked to. He was building something, collecting it all, though it came to nothing in the end because he died before he could bring it anywhere." She looked at him carefully. "I still have those documents. I gave copies to the lawyer, but he says it would take years, and money we don't have to pursue it properly. A federal case, maybe. Something bigger than a county court where Marsh has influence." Cal was quiet. "I'm not asking you to fix it," she said. "I know it's not your problem. I just wanted you to know that it's not finished, not completely, and that those records exist, in case you ever cross paths with someone who could use them." Cal nodded. He thought about the kind of men who dealt in such things. Federal marshals, certain lawyers he'd heard of, people who moved in larger circles than county judges and local sheriffs. He made no promises, but he listened, and he stored the information away in the place in his mind where he kept things that mattered. Thomas had come out onto the porch by then, Ghost at his side, the dog navigating the unfamiliar boards of the porch with careful steps, but his tail still going, still pressed close to the boy's leg. Thomas looked at Cal with 17-year-old eyes that had aged considerably in 3 months. "Thank you," he said. It came out rough, not quite steady. "He's a good dog," Cal said. "He gave me no trouble on the road." "He never gives trouble," Thomas said. "He never did." A pause. "His name is Ghost." "I know," Cal said. "I called him something else on the road, but I think he always knew his real name." Thomas crouched down and put his hand on Ghost's back, and the dog turned and put his nose against the boy's face. And that was the end of the conversation that needed to happen. Cal rode out of Fort Worth late that afternoon, heading back west. He wasn't sure exactly where he was going after that. There was a man in Lubbock who'd mentioned needing help with some construction work, and there was a stretch of country near the New Mexico border he'd always meant to see. The world was full of places he hadn't been yet, and he was in no particular hurry. He rode for a couple of hours before he stopped for the night beside a small creek, where the cottonwoods were younger and greener than the ones he'd found the dog under, and the water ran clear over smooth stones. He made a small fire and ate what he had, and watched the stars come out over the Texas dark, which was a different kind of dark than the dark anywhere else, wider and deeper, with more sky than a person could reasonably use. He thought about what Mary Calloway had said about her husband's documents. He thought about Corvin Marsh getting everything he'd wanted. He thought about how sometimes justice moved slowly, and sometimes it didn't move at all, and sometimes it came from unexpected directions. Years after the fact, when the person who'd set it in motion was long gone and didn't even know what they'd started. He thought about a blind dog that moved in straight lines toward wherever it was going. He put out the fire and rolled up in his blanket and slept well, which he usually did, being a man who tried to account for his actions each day and leave no particular debts unpaid. He didn't think of what he'd done as anything much. He'd seen something that needed doing and he'd done it. That was all. He didn't think about the reward he'd gotten, not the money from Mary Calloway, though he was glad enough to have it, but the other thing, the thing that was harder to name. The look on Thomas's face at the door, the sound Ghost made when he recognized the boy's voice, the particular weight of a thing going right in a world that often went otherwise. Cal Donovan had been moving through the world for 34 years, mostly alone, which was how he preferred it, or had decided to prefer it, which wasn't quite the same thing. He had no illusions about himself. He was not a hero of any variety he'd been able to identify. He fixed fences and collected debts and moved from one town to the next, and didn't cause much trouble and didn't accumulate much either. But there were moments when the world arranged itself in a way that reminded him why moving through it was worth the trouble. When something he did, some small, ordinary decision, like following a horse off a trail toward a cluster of cottonwood trees, turned out to matter to someone else in a way he hadn't been able to predict and couldn't have planned. He'd found a blind dog tied to a tree and cut the rope. That was the whole of it, on the surface of it. But underneath that surface, there was a boy who had his dog back, and a woman who felt that at least one thing had been returned to her out of everything that had been taken, and a sheriff in a small town who had found the exact edge of what he could actually do and had done it, and records that existed somewhere that might someday find the right hands, and an old man named Delbert Cush, who had needed to tell the truth to someone and had found someone willing to listen. Cal Donovan pulled his hat down over his eyes against the chill of the Texas night. None of that was what he'd gone looking for when he'd ridden out that morning from Abilene with $40 on his mind and a low canteen and the long country ahead of him. But it was what he'd found, and it was enough. It was more than enough. The stars kept their vigil over the flat land, cold and bright and indifferent the way stars are, and Fable dozed on her feet nearby, and the creek ran over its stones with that patient sound that water has been making since long before men named it, or rode beside it, or rested their tired bones next to it in the dark. Far to the east, in a modest house on the edge of Fort Worth, a blind dog slept pressed against the side of a boy who had stopped thinking, just for this night, about everything that had been lost, because one thing, one small, remarkable, white-chested, stub-tailed thing had found its way back. That is not a small thing. That is never a small thing. And somewhere on the Texas plain, a man who had asked for nothing and expected nothing turned in his sleep and was at peace with the day that was ending and the one that was coming, carrying between them whatever it was the world had in store. He did not know what that was. He never did. That was why he kept moving.